He was the American dream, really. I mean, he sort of embodies that kid who comes from absolutely nothing, raised in Tupelo, and then becomes the most famous man on the planet, and then he also embodied so many eras of time. You know, I mean. It feels like he lived 100 years, but it's amazing that he was only here for 42. But the fact that you can see him in the 50s as this young, vibrant 19-year-old kid, and you look on the Dorsey Brothers performances or on the Ed Sullivan Show, and Milton Berle, and it feels like that's a whole other life from the 60s and all the films that he did in that time, and from 68 Special, and then the 70s feel like this whole other era. So he spends so much time, and it's such a fascinating thing that somebody to have that sort of mark on this world. I'm just gonna drop everything, and I'm just gonna obsess. I'm going to allow myself to obsess, and so I just started reading and watching everything I could on Elvis's life and on his friends and on his relationships, and listened to only his music, and I just treated it as though I already had the job, and so this was January 2 years ago. And then by about February, they hadn't even started auditioning yet, and I sent Baz a video of me playing the piano and singing Unchained Melody. You want to do them justice, and you want to honor them and their life, and then you add on top of that somebody who is so iconic and who everybody knows, and who so many people have paid tribute to or impersonated, and that is, it's hard not to feel like a little kid in your dad's suit, like you're wearing these really big shoes that you can hardly walk in, and that was something that for a long time I thought it was impossible. The fact that his energy was so massive. He was such an extraordinary human being that he almost seems superhuman, that he seems larger than life itself, and that's something that I've had so many people help me with over this process. I mean, starting with Baz and Catherine Martin and Polly Bennett with movement, and dialect coaches, and everyone down the line. There's just been such an incredible team supporting this whole process. That's and it's been that thing of how do you climb Mount Everest, but just one step at a time. We went to Nashville and Memphis, and we recorded in RCA where Elvis recorded, I forgot how many songs it is now, but I want to say 240 songs or something in Studio B there, and so we recorded there, and it's also where Dolly Parton recorded Jolene. It was my first time ever in a recording studio, and I was so nervous, and I was with some of the best musicians in Nashville, and standing there where Elvis had recorded, and we had the actual machine that he had recorded Heartbreak Hotel on, and I recorded Heartbreak Hotel in there, and Blue Suede Shoes, and Hound Dog, and to say it was surreal is an understatement. It was beyond anything I could have comprehended, you know, and it's just such an amazing experience. And there were moments in that where Baz actually said, it's my first day ever in a recording studio, and he said, all right, I want you to turn, rather than have the microphone facing the band, I'm going to turn you away from them, and we're going to get all the people from the offices of RCA to come out and be in the audience, and you're going to sing to them, Blue Suede Shoes. I was so incredibly nervous. I felt absolutely nauseous, but it was moments like that where you have to walk into the fire. Baz really is truly one of my favorite people. I'm gonna get emotional right now. He's such a kind, empathetic, loving, caring individual who is, on top of that, just a genius in every sense of the word. But he doesn't rest on that either. He works so hard, and he prepares, and his attention to detail is unlike anyone else. And he's so supportive, and no matter who it is, whether it's the person sweeping the sets, or the people making the sets, or me, or any of the actors, or anybody on set, he's so kind, and if he has a direction for anybody, he finds a way of doing it in such a positive way. He never admonishes anybody, and so the entire set everybody feels welcome, and you feel like you're free to make mistakes and free to try things, and so there's an environment where you can feel fear, but you know that you're safe. I think understanding some of Colonel's background is really fascinating with their relationship. The fact that he's really he's a carny at heart, you know, and so always looking for the newest attraction, the thing that's going to draw audiences into the carnival, and I think when he saw Elvis, that's what he saw in him. I mean, Colonel started with Dancing Chickens, and then eventually, you know, to see the way that audiences reacted to Elvis, I think it was the greatest attraction he'd ever seen. They had this really symbiotic relationship, and that was great in the beginning, because Colonel was a genius at marketing, at being able to get Elvis on television. I mean, it's remarkable to think what would have happened if Elvis never met the Colonel. We may not know him. You know, he was locally famous, but would he have ever shot to superstardom in that way? I don't know, because there's a lot of artists around that same time who didn't make it out of the 50s, and so that I think that they definitely needed each other in the beginning. I think that it got to a certain point where it became sort of a toxic relationship, and Elvis's loyalty to the Colonel may have been misguided, but it's a tricky thing when you're really on the inside of it, because I mean, you talk to Priscilla now, and I know Tom's talked about this, but how they all really loved the Colonel. They had a lot of nice things to say about him. I mean, they would sort of call him a con man, but then at the same time they said, well, he would remember your birthday, and he'd always send you a cake on your birthday, and it was really funny to be around, and so a lot of people really loved him. And I think Elvis did love him as a father. I was nervous and afraid of the big numbers with tons of extras. To go out there and perform in front of a lot of people. Before I had done it, I was filled with terror at that idea. And I actually spoke to Rami Malek about it, and he said, you know, those days will probably end up becoming your favorite days. And he said that he was terrified about them in the beginning too, but they ended up becoming his. And he could not be more right about that. They were so, I was terrified every time before going out there. But it was, once those first couple takes are down, and Elvis said it as well, he would say, once those first couple songs, once you do them and you kind of realize, okay, nobody's gonna throw a rock at me, like it's all okay. Then you feel that connection and you feel how you can play with the audience, and it becomes incredibly, it was, there were days, I didn't want the days to be over. We had the most incredible prosthetics team and hair team, and Catherine Martin leading everything to do with everything that I wear in the film, and just an absolutely brilliant team of people coming together, and it helps massively. When you look in the mirror and you start to see the transformation, and it makes you feel different. It really does. Or if I have a little bit of weight on me, it makes you walk differently, and makes you breathe differently, and that in turn makes you truly feel different emotionally. And I hope they have a good time and connect to music that maybe they didn't know before, or have an experience where they get to see it through new eyes. Or I hope that they come out feeling more vibrant and hopeful. Yola was amazing. She not only is her performance so incredible, she's one of the most powerful voices I've ever heard. And she, between takes, she would give me vocal coaching. So she would say, you know, this is a technique that I use, and she was wonderful. We had a really good time, and she really she crushed that role. Shanka is one of the most incredible people I've ever met. She's so incredibly gracious and soft-spoken and gentle, and then you see her sing Hound Dog, and she comes out with so much power. It's amazing to witness. Her performance of Hound Dog in that was the type of thing where everybody who wasn't filming that day showed up because they knew she was going to be singing it. And so I was doing something else on a different set, and I came over just to see her sing that, and it was unbelievable. She's wonderful. Alton, I met Alton for the first time with Baz at this awards show in Australia. And Baz, we'd seen him, he won some award, like Model of the Year award or something. And we saw him at the after party, and he was in this silver lame one-piece outfit with, and he was dancing, and the way he was dancing was so remarkable. And Baz looked at me at one point, he said, I think that's Little Richard. And sure enough, he came down, and he really, he worked so hard and on the choreography and on all of Richard's movements and stuff, and it was really impressive. I was really impressed by him, and he's just a remarkably ethereal man. I really enjoyed my time with him. I was such a huge Gary Clark Jr. fan before this, and so I was really excited when I knew he was coming on board, and then he showed up, and nobody really plays guitar like him. He's so incredible. And he'd learned these new techniques that were, well, old techniques, but the way that Big Boy Crudup played. And he was just amazing. And so I was kind of a fanboy. I was there just watching him play, and he's incredible. And his rendition of that song as well is outstanding. And then same, you know, between takes, we'd be in one of the back rooms, and he had this old guitar that was, I think it was a 120-year-old guitar or something like that, and he picked it up and he said, "You want to play it?" And so I played it, and he goes, "You know, this is a little thing that I do on blues scales," and he starts teaching me the guitar, and that was one of my fondest memories on the film. Kelvin is he's an exceptional actor. I was also a fan of his from beforehand, and we've known each other for years, and so I was really looking forward to getting to explore that relationship between B.B. King and Elvis. And I just knew that our dynamic would be a really fun one to get to explore. And he came in with so many ideas and really just knocked it out of the park, and we had a lot of fun together.
I think the familiar story of this, a genius that comes along only once in a couple of generations, Elvis. Like Picasso comes along once in a generation, or Charlie Chaplin comes along once in a generation, and alters not just the cultural form that he makes his living in, but also the society that decides this is a cultural shift that we're going to embrace, and Elvis was that. My desire, my fascination, my continuous drive was to have the Colonel become a guy who said yes to Picasso. Never, no, here's what you do, we're not going to do this. I mean, there was a standard kind of like manager, performer kind of thing. Let me tell you what we're going to do, kid. We're going to go like this. And the Colonel was not that. He was this other odd, fascinating amalgamation of Carney, you know, an old carnival guy, wicked smart businessman, dime squeezing skinflint, you know, but also a pioneer in a big type of show business that did not exist until Elvis Presley, a supreme artist when it came down to his music. And the only, you don't want to say only time, but when he was at his most magical and most pure and most wonderful, most Elvis, was when he was interpreting a song that he loved. And I get it, you know. I got it based on the education I got in the course of making this movie. So I can actually say now, I listen to Elvis in a whole new way because we made this movie. And I know an awful lot about the background of each individual song and what era that he made it. Wonderfully ephemeral in what all of that was, because we had the luxury periodically of doing very, very concrete scenes in rooms with people talking to each other, without a doubt. But all the other stuff was essentially dancing through sort of like the time-space continuum that is inside Baz's mind. And you just, you know, you just go, man, go. And it's great hard work. It's hard work, but it's great, and it's great hard work. Elvis did this thing with That's All Right, Mama. It's undeniable that that's not just lightning in a bottle. That's a comet smashing into the planet Earth, and it's altering the landscape and the climate. Elvis did that. And I think that's what the movie is about. I think Elvis is about the next evolution of cultural life after a comet smashed into the world. And it happened to land in Memphis. That's where it landed. And everything, all the fallout from that became this massive thing. The Colonel knew that Elvis would never be able to stay this guy who wiggled his hips on TV and sang rock and roll songs. So that when he came back from the Army, the Colonel turned him into Dean Martin. The Colonel turned him into the remaining that great signpost for the generation that was growing up with him. And he was right. And then along with that came, you know, the movie career, for good or for bad, but nonetheless, commerce and, you know, you could say Elvis was really great in maybe 5 movies, but I'm going to tell you right now, 3 of those movies were box office disasters, and that's what caught him. They were, you know. Everybody says, oh, the Colonel put him in all those terrible movies. The Colonel put him in movies. The Colonel didn't care what movies they were. A risk and a responsibility that Austin took on that, when the time came, had to be huge and intimate at the same time. And he came out on stage. It was electrifying, you know, and he had to do it. I think we probably had to do it 30 times of everything that was going on, and you could not take your eyes off him every single time. You just wanted to see him do it again and again and again and again. And part of that is certainly channeling. Part of it is, I think, the drive that Austin has, and always has as an actor. But there's also a huge amount of faith that he had in the process and in himself that is, it's not unlike Elvis.
He's not just another rock star. He's actually a symbol of culture in the same way that Marilyn Monroe isn't just another movie star. She embodies a time, a place, a sensibility, a symbology, really. And Elvis has become that. Now, that's an amazing thing, but that's also problematic when it comes to exploring his life. Because as Elvis said, it's very hard to live up to an image. And as he also said, I'm so tired of playing Elvis Presley. So our mission, and Austin went on an extraordinary 3-year journey to do this, was to discover the human being. Is he to be trusted? Well, any telling of anyone's life is only somebody's telling. It's only somebody's point of view. And so our convention, I think, having Parker tell it, means that, I mean, I've spoken to so many. And if you speak to, you know, if you get the stories from someone who knew him in the Comeback Special, or someone who was in the group that was around him, they're going to remember it from their point of view. And so Parker tells it from his point of view. And that allows us to, I think, make choices for the bigger idea. And I think the bigger idea, and it's a very, I think it's a very American reality, is that it's called show business. And that Elvis was an incredible artist, no matter which way you look at it. But there's also the business side of it. And when they work together, things flourish. And when they get out of balance, when it's only about the business, when it's only about taking care of business, then I think tragedy will eventually ensue. She has absolute genius and a gift for taking my visual language, bowerbirding or collaging or cues and scribbles, and translating it into fine art. And then we work very closely on that. I mean, from hems in a costume to how the color of the walls in a mansion. I get a call from Denzel Washington, who I do not know. And he says, hi. I say, hi, Denzel. He says, look, I've just been on stage with this young guy called Austin Butler in a play. And I don't normally do this, but I'm just ringing you to tell you, I have never seen a work ethic like that. And it was my privilege to discover, after me putting through the ringer, trying to make him crack, I guess, to see could he sustain the incredible journey. Didn't even come near it, like it was just nothing I threw at him would he be bothered by. But sing, move like Elvis, sound like Elvis, read every single thing, and do karate. I never met Austin that he didn't have his iPhone on, was scanning every YouTube thing, anything he could find, or rereading the book, or we had a dojo set up, and he worked with this absolutely gifted person called Polly Bennett, who does actor movement. She's a choreographer. She's just gifted in a unique way. But honestly, they would get into the dojo at whatever in the morning, and if he wasn't doing other tests and stuff, he'd be sweating. There was a moment when I actually had to go to Austin. This is a real story. And my producer, Patrick, said, you better go. I said, look, Aust, sometimes you've got to curve back, because if you keep going like this, you will break. And he was like, sure, yeah. He's the most lovely person. Yeah, absolutely. As soon as I walked out, he was back at it. The exciting thing about Tom was, I think, you know, he's so gifted at playing people that you love and admire, and that he's beloved by the country, by the world. But actors want to show you that they can play different notes on their instrument. And he's never really got to play the dark note, the scary note, the bass. It's a really, really delicate journey with Priscilla, because on the one hand, she's an icon in her own right. And yet she's always been at the center of the story, and she's had her own life, and she's done very significant things, and she did really good things for the estate. And it's not for me to get into the complexity of being in a family where your husband, your father, your grandfather, your uncle becomes an icon of such magnitude that there's no corner of the earth that he hasn't actually touched. It's not for me to delve into or talk about my own view of, was study, 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 live, 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 absorb, absorb, absorb. And then it becomes Austin Elvis interpretation, because the number one thing was to make him human and spiritual. Human and spiritual. So I love them to understand the humanity of the man. I'd also love it to bust a lot of inappropriate myths and frankly misinformation about the man's journey. I'd love them to understand that this is someone who was so dirt poor, who was in very unusual circumstances, who was so shy, who just wanted to get over his shyness through singing, and was driven by the need to get out of poverty, to rescue his parents out of poverty. And then see actually somewhat the great American dream actually flourishing, but also with immense success, flying too close to the sun and like Icarus, tumbling to the floor in what I think is the lows, the music, the love, the looks, the fashion. But most of all, they come out and they're still talking about it after that connection and support was there all the way through it. So I had to find someone, a bit like Juliet actually, in Romeo and Juliet. I had to find someone who was a bit mature beyond their years, and Olivia is that. She's a very, very smart, she has real opinions, you know, and I love that. Anton, supervisor on this, Elliot, or the music team. I consider music, the script, and the visual language all as one. I literally developed 3 scripts, really. The musical script, the written word, and the visual script. And at a certain point with those collaborators, I bring it all into one synthesis, so that when actors come into my world, there's a visualization already, there's a musicalization already, which I know is not a word. My usage, I made it up. And then there's the text, a script. And they all live at once. I don't come in and say, look, there's a script, now let's think about the music. Because to me, music is not a background, music is a script. You can say, I mean, particularly with Elvis, I mean, actually, access to the inner life of Elvis, he's not a particularly verbal person. He doesn't do long 20-minute screeds like I do. But when he opens his mouth and he sings, you feel, you know him.
One thing that I adore about Little Richard is he's from the South, and my dad is from Shreveport, Louisiana. So it kind of felt like it was within my realm, with him being from Macon, Georgia. And with him growing up with 12 brothers and sisters and feeling like he had to provide for them. And I'm the oldest of 4 siblings. So yeah, I felt like, you know what, I could become this. I could be this. And what an honor, considering all that he's done. Listen, Baz is the truth, okay? Like, Baz has this power of making you feel like you're the only one in the room when he's talking to you. He has this power of taking what you're doing and amplifying it and igniting that fire in you that will make you express or emote or feel everything that's happening in real time. And he has a very beautiful way of capturing that entire moment, and it makes you feel really special. He's a very special person, and it's reflected within his team. He's such a beautiful leader, and his team are leaders as well. And they are very egoless, and they're operating from a place of love. You can actually feel it. It's like water working with Baz. And fire. It's so fun. Little Richard is so unique and so original, and his legacy could never be undone. I get emotional because all I want is to make them proud. And to add more shine to his legacy and represent him and all that he's done in the lane that he's paved for us.
Playing somebody like BB, you know, as iconic as he is, it's been exciting and it's been really rewarding, but there's so many, I've learned so much about how not to try to do the whole mimicry thing, you know? It's really easy to fall into the trap of just like, well, I'm just gonna learn his facial expressions and I'm gonna learn how to talk like him and I'm gonna just do everything just like him. It's like, you know, within the time I had, I can't do that, one. Two, in Baz's world, you know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily need to be like that. And it's not that interesting, and it's more so, I think what was so important and what I love about Baz so much is that the storytelling is first. The storytelling is so important, and you can find ways to get the spirit and the soulfulness and the love and the passion and the charm and the charisma and the control and the clarity without completely just, you know, doing I'm Baby King, you know what I mean? He has a lot of guitar tutorials that he did, which was really interesting because he really breaks down why. Because how he talks and how he thinks is how he plays. And that was really interesting. So it's like listening to the music, especially the early albums, and a lot of the live shows were really good too as well, because you get a sense of, I felt like how I would imagine him to be with his boys, you know what I mean? How I imagine him to be like, you know, when we're doing that scene on the outside on the fire escape, it's the private moments. Working with Austin has been such a treat. I met him briefly before we started this movie, and because we have the same agent. And I remember hearing the process of him auditioning for it, and he was getting close, and then him getting the movie, and his prep in the beginning, and how intense it was. And I was so in awe of his work ethic. I was so in awe of his commitment to it. And I was just excited to see what this would be like. And I never thought I would get to like come and actually witness it. And just when I finally got here, how generous he is, how kind he is, how patient he is, and how passionate he is about just really honoring, you know, a legacy that is far bigger than Elvis in a lot of ways, you know? He's funny, he knows what he wants, he knows how to encourage and empower artists. You know, everyone feels so alive and feels so excited to come to work. And even, you know, the background artists, you know, feel like they have a character. So then when you're walking through the hallways, they're having conversations that feel like we're in 57. And the flirtation, the energy, the excitement for the music. He creates a world, and you walk into the world and you exist. It's simple, you exist. You don't overthink it, you don't judge yourself for it, you get out of your own head, you let your ego go, and as we would say in Club Handy, we let it all hang out.
He creates this world that feels like a dream. You feel like you're time traveling when you're on set. And actually this set was where we did Dixie's first scene with the family and Elvis's reveal as well. And I had this funny moment where I was just lost in my own world, and I was looking around the set, and we were doing a big master shot, so there were cranes and there were hundreds of extras and all these contrasting shadows and light and these rich colors. And for a moment I went, oh, this looks like a Baz Luhrmann movie. And I went, oh, it is. and so yeah, I just think Baz just creates that world so beautifully. It's magical. The initial conversations with Baz were really about Dixie's role in the family, because the thing is with Elvis and his girlfriends is that when you were dating Elvis, you became a part of the family, and Gladys often, if she liked you, really brought you into that. And so Dixie's connection with Elvis was obviously incredibly important, as was her connection to Gladys, because they became really close. Even when Elvis, you know, became more famous and started touring around the South, Dixie would go and stay at their house when Elvis wasn't there, just to keep Gladys and Vernon company. Working with Austin has been so much fun. I actually had the pleasure of meeting him at the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood premiere, which he was absolutely fantastic in. And I was up for the movie at that point, and he had just been cast as Elvis. So that was quite surreal. And to be working with him now is just amazing. He's so talented. And I remember our very first live reading of the script in the early stages of production, where we were all there and Austin was performing the songs live as well as doing some dancing during the reading. And I was just blown away. It was like Elvis was in the room. He had already totally embodied the energy of Elvis, and it's electrifying. Even watching him perform here on set some days, it's really incredible, and I'm very inspired by his work ethic.
You know, I've studied blues since I was a child, since I was 12 years old, growing up in Austin, Texas, and you know, they're just some guys that you need to know. And I had a guy in particular, Clifford Antone, who would tell me about, you know, kind of these unsung heroes, you know, like Big Boy and, you know, Jimmy Reed and, you know, some of the guys that people don't really understand, that a lot of rock and roll bands kind of got their start by covering these, you know, songs, you know. So I really felt like it was something that I was meant to do. A lot of the stories that happen to, you know, unfortunately to black artists in those times. And, you know, they would put out a hit or two and, you know, get a little bit of notoriety, but wouldn't really get paid or be credited. And I think for some light to be shown on him, you know, in this day and age, and it's just important for his imprint and what he did and what he pioneered to not be lost, you know, because people think, oh, I came up with this, or I invented this, or I started this, created this thing. It's like this whole rock and roll thing, this whole rock star, you know, all that wouldn't have been possible if some of these guys weren't handpicked from, you know, the Delta, you know, down in Mississippi and, you know, down in the South of the United States. So just a little bit of light, you know, as much as we can give these guys, I think is important. So I'm all here for that. I think taking risks, I mean, even, you know, wiggling on TV was risky at the time. And I think people really expressing themselves and that being captured and being spread all over the world, you know, on TV, and, you know, I think that made people feel connected in a way that they could let loose and be vulnerable and sing about things that were not necessarily supposed to be sung about or talked about, you know. A vulnerability, I think, that touched people, you know. I think his sincerity, his sense of humor, you know, all that resonates with people because sometimes we feel alone and like we're not connected. And for somebody to get up there and pour their soul out, you know, people talk about that. You know, people build friendships, people fall in love to that. You know, people create beautiful memories. If you do your research, if you read the credits, you know, the songwriters, you can go back and figure out where all this stuff came from. You know, you can hear it in the tempo, you can hear it in the swing. If you understand what American music is based on, you understand that black musicians in the South, from blues, folk, gospel music, created American rock and roll.
Well, I got involved in this movie through being a musician. I'm now based in Nashville. At the time, I was living between Bristol and Nashville, and I was due to come over to the States to do some shows, and I got a call from Dave Cobb going, like, do you want to come over? Like, we're doing this soundtrack, and we think you're going to be perfect for a certain vocal. Sent me a song, and I had to kind of do a little bit of sing a Sister Rosetta Tharpe song, and so I did, and we sent it across, and like, yeah, just what we thought, come on in. She's one of the principal creators of rock and roll music. When you see her play, no one had ever played like that before. Terrifying, thanks. I was absolutely crapping myself, yeah. Yeah, it was terrifying. And so I play acoustic guitar, I play rhythm, okay? Not lead. And crucially, I don't simultaneously like shred and sing. Like if I'm singing, I'm playing rhythm, you know. And so I had to learn how to play melody and sing melody that would counter that melody. Because she just did that all the time like it was nothing, you know? And so, yeah, that was terrifying and took a lot of work. But, you know, I landed every plane. And so that feels good, you know.
Tom Parker allows you to deal with an enormous scope, story scope. So you're able to go from Elvis as a child right through to the very sad end when we all know Elvis dies. And it also allows you into the world of the construction of this hugely famous figure and the relationship and partnership between Elvis and the Colonel, and the uneasy relationship between fame, the exploitation of fame at all costs, the birth of merchandising, the birth of the cell. Baz was very clear that there were some moments that he calls train spotting. Train spotting is what people do who are aficionados of trains, and they're able to tell at great distances what actual model and make a train is. So he felt that there were moments in the storytelling where we had to be absolutely truthful to the historic reference. But there are other times in the film where there are fictionalized scenes where we could use the visual storytelling to help move the story forward. And also we discovered in working with the actors that you need to take into account the performance and the interpretation of any given person approaching these historical roles. And they need to become an amalgam of the historical figure, their perspective of that historical figure, and who they are physically. Otherwise, it just becomes a kind of macabre parade of Halloween costumes to recreate Graceland in certain periods as exactly as we can. However, we're also not making a documentary. So sometimes there are time compressions in the story that we use for storytelling, or Baz has used for storytelling purposes in order to advance the plot or underline a particular point that is trying to be made in the story. So it's a weave of historical accuracy, very deliberate interpretive moments that help move the story forward. And of course there's a perspective because the story's told by Tom Parker. So it's his memory of the events. So it's not meant to be a blow-by-blow recreation of Elvis's life, because not only is there a filmmaking perspective, but there's also the perspective of Colonel Tom Parker. He's telling the story of him. We had to bridge 3 decades, so the 50s, 60s and 70s. And I think Baz wanted us to get to the heart of each decade so that there was a distinct shift in look between all these periods, so the audience understood where they were in time. And it also helps to position people into the iconic style moments. I mean, Priscilla obviously is a contemporary style icon. The way that she wore her hair is iconic. Elvis's hair is iconic. And so it was very important to hit those particular markers and to make sure that the vast numbers of people, because another part of the movie making in this film is that we have such large numbers of crowd and supporting artists, because we're either at a concert or we're in a street scene in Beale Street in Memphis in the 50s, or we're in the showroom in the 1970s, and those supporting artists create a large part of the context in which you see Elvis change as a performer, and also it helps you to read the rise in his status and the rise in his fame into account the interpretation that the actor was bringing, the part of them that they were bringing to the historical character. So we have studied all the references absolutely to the nth degree and tried to find the spirit of those garments and make them live on the people who are creating the characters. I think it's very important to remember that we're telling a story. So this isn't a documentary on Elvis's life, it's a story told through the eyes of Colonel Tom Parker. And these extraordinary performances that are created by Tom Hanks and Austin Butler need to take into account, all the clothes need to take into account how they're, going to present the character. So it's a balancing act between finding the signs and symbols that will allow people to lock in to recognising who the characters are, but then at the same time making sure that you're being respectful to the story that stands alone from all those things. An incredible joy to see Austin create such a dynamic portrayal of Elvis. And just, on the one hand, he's so respectful to all of the intricate historical detail. So sometimes if we're recreating something like Milton Berle, they'll be running Elvis doing the routine on Milton Berle on the monitor simultaneously with Austin. And he's not watching that performance, but every gesture, every finger move, every twist of the knee, he will be absolutely in sync with Elvis, but at the same time, he's bringing his own heart and soul to it. Just his ability to move and sing and dance with such passion and dedication. I mean, it's absolutely thrilling. Like, you just can't believe that he's been able to straddle all those decades, whether it's seeing him in the jumpsuits in the 70s or seeing him in those first moments of creating the persona of Elvis. To me, that has been extraordinary, of that larger than life, totally likeable rogue. Like, on the one hand, totally despicable, and on the other hand, irresistibly charming. And his ability to convince you that he is Colonel Tom Parker, and just to be so shocked on a routine basis when he was back to being Tom Hanks, you were just like, oh, where did Colonel Tom Parker go? Amazing African-American cast who were subjected to 2 weeks of quarantine and then came to work on the Beale Street sequences and also the Pentecostal revival service. And that was fabulous to be able to create iconic looks for Big Mama Thornton, or recreate them rather, and to work with Yola in creating a sort of a take on her character. I think that we've been blessed because the visual scope of the costuming has just run the gamut. There are just so many iconic moments, from Alton Mason as Little Richard, just great clothes. I mean, it's very hard to pin down one iconic look. Part of the process of helping an actor and a director create character. And, you still learn things every day. Alton Mason shocked and surprised me with his wisdom and ability to get me to change my mind and see things in a completely different way, which ultimately benefited the movie. We'd been going down a particular path with a certain costume for Little Richard, and he questioned its veracity. It was just this fabulous moment of collaboration where he just went, look, this is what I'm thinking, da-da-da. And it was just fabulous to be able to, in a fitting room, using what we had available to us, because I think we were shooting in 24 hours, just recreate the character. And I think that's...
Conversations with Baz were just around, I guess, him romanticizing, Elvis Presley, and how he wanted to position the film with Colonel Tom Parker and how his character would be involved. And he pitched the character to me that Steve Binder and the Colonel had come head to head, basically at this intersection at the end of 1967 into 68, because Steve didn't want to do things the traditional way, and Steve didn't give a toss about the Colonel or being pushed around by the Colonel. And I think that was really interesting to me. Obviously, Tom Hanks is an incredible actor. The relationship between Steve Binder and Austin was really sort of interesting because they had to have this creative sort of flow and rhythm that led them to produce this piece together. And they have an electric energy together to be able to use the draw of breaking rules in order to make creative discoveries. That's primarily their motive and their placement in this narrative. And because of that, they have a hugely profound impact, I believe, on Elvis Presley's life, because he himself is at an intersection of change. As I said, from coming from 7 or 8 year period of making sort of crappy movies and of the music industry changing so quickly and so prominently in that time, many bands coming to become popular, that he needs a change, and Binder and Bones are that change, and they're willing to really break barriers and put him on stage and have him talk about his life, which was something that hadn't happened before and something that the Colonel had not let happen. Incredible guy and actor. I think off screen he's a great friend. He's incredibly humble and down to earth, and those are things that I think people take for granted over talent a lot of the time. But if you can have that and talent, I think you're the best person on the planet to work with, because it's an incredible experience. He was born to play Elvis Presley. There's no one else that was meant to play Elvis Presley. He's an old soul, and he, I think, understands on a human level what Elvis was going through. Baz works so differently in the best possible way to any director I've worked with before. His attention to detail, I think, is really what struck me, probably the first physical production day. He has a sort of intense interest in every element, in every department, right? Whereas sometimes, a director's just glued to the monitor. He's thinking about things, he's physically involved, he pours everything into it. And I think you throw CM into the mix, who's also equally talented and creatively driven and inspiring and so on and so forth. The duo, just, that's when you have sparks, and that's when I think you have, you know, the Baz Luhrmann film, the Baz Luhrmann experience. And it isn't like anything else that exists, right? So that's been it's been a really formative period of time, both in pre-production and in physical production for me, to work with somebody like that, and also someone who's such an iconic.
Jerry Schilling is a kind of teenage friend of Elvis Presley's. We kind of meet him running around Graceland when just as Elvis is kind of starting out, Elvis kind of needed an extra player for a game of pickup kind of football, and Jerry was a pretty good football player, and so he kind of came in and played along, and I think because he was pretty good, Elvis liked to have him on his team, and so they built up a friendship, like a really honest, earnest childhood friendship, and that kind of friendship spanned the length of his life, which was really a beautiful thing. Jerry kind of came in and out of Elvis's life in that way. He managed to kind of forge his own path in life, and really wanted to, and was able to go on a bit of a journey with Elvis and found himself in LA with him. And then Jerry was kind of interested in what he could do with his life, and so he was able to become a music manager and kind of get into the business, but still have Elvis as a really good friend and still be there as a sounding board for him, and to give him advice and to basically be his friend and to look out for him. So it's a really lovely relationship that they have in that way. It's a true friendship and an honest friendship that, you know, people in Elvis's position sometimes don't get. There's a lot of hangers-on and maybe people who are maybe some yes men and stuff like that. So I think what Elvis got with Jerry was a true friend who was honest with him and spoke his mind and wasn't afraid to say something that maybe Elvis didn't like or the Colonel didn't like or whatever. And I think that's what you want in friends, is someone who's going to be honest with you and truthful with you. And yeah, he's a really great guy that way, Jerry, and has always been close to the family and still is. My initial conversation with Baz was we had a phone call over kind of a video call, and we just sat down and kind of talked about Elvis as a person and a cultural icon, and kind of the relevance that he still has through today, and also Colonel Parker as a character and as a person, and kind of the relevance that he still has through to today, and kind of those things. And then we also talked about Jerry and his vision as Jerry being the audience inside this, in a way. That kind of, we just want the best for him, and we can kind of see, what's happening to him, and we're the ones screaming out, are we going to stand by and watch this happen while everyone else does? And kind of feeling a little bit like Chicken Little. I think Jerry is a little bit of a character that we kind of talked about, this guy who can see what's going on, but no one's listening to him, and everyone's ignoring him and ignoring what's right in front of their face. So yeah, Baz and I's conversation was kind of very holistic around the whole story, around Jerry, around where it sits culturally in the world then, and where it sits culturally in the world now. So, yeah, the Memphis Mafia were kind of the world's first entourage. Like, I think Elvis was like the first person to have an entourage, and that was their role in that way, and they kind of were the leaders of that idea that people in these positions culturally kind of need to have that kind of support network around them. I think a lot of it was companionship. You know, I think if you don't have those people around you that you know from your home, it can get pretty lonely, and once you start meeting new people, it'd be hard to trust them in that way. So it was maybe like a comfort blanket thing for Elvis, was the Mafia, and they were all, you know, nice guys that cared about him, and they were all quite good friends, and I think they were just there because they loved Elvis, and Elvis really enjoyed their company and really loved them. So it was just kind of, if you got the opportunity to take your mates everywhere, you'd take them everywhere, wouldn't you? Austin Butler brings a determination to the role of Elvis that is really amazing to see. his dedication to it and the work that he's put in has been quite amazing to see someone transform into another person, but then still have a sense of self, and to not do an impression, but to be able to embody this person and then still make him their own and their own unique thing has been a really impressive thing to see. And all along that way, to be a real kind and lovely and warm person through it all has been a real testament to Austin as a person and his character. You know, it's hard to lead something like this and to have all that weight on your shoulders. The pressure must be immense, but then to still carry it with humility and laughter and to be a warm and open person, I think speaks volumes as to who he is as a person.
In the interviews that you see that he did, and there's a few of them, there's not a lot, but there's a few. And in everything that you read about him, I found him incredibly opaque, I guess. And that was fascinating because Elvis was so out there and so much the kind of polar opposite in so many ways, and yet his dad was this kind of extremely reserved, very private domain. And talking to Baz about it, it was like, well, how are we going to unpick that? How are we going to shed light on not only what he was, but what his relationship with Elvis was? Father, married to Gladys, and we're introduced to him in the film at an early concert of Elvis's called The Hayride. And we see these very poor people. They were very poor, they were dirt poor. People gathering around Elvis to kind of buoy him up before he goes in to do a concert, because Elvis is absolutely terrified. And so it's quite beautiful. You see this family sort of holding hands and singing a gospel song to buoy him up. And so in that moment, you get an interesting, fascinating insight into their otherness and also their closeness, their connectedness to Elvis. Didn't quite know enough about it when I was reading it at that point to know about the story of the Colonel. And so to see Baz's using the Colonel as a way in, as a sort of prism to unfold the story of Elvis was terrific, because through that there's a kind of bent and twisted, fantastic carnival thing. Because he's the carnival operator, he's a kind of great showman. And in a way, Baz kind of loves that character. There was, it's very much like the character that Jim Broadbent played, in a sense, in Moulin Rouge. But of course, the Colonel based on an actual historical figure, and a fascinating one. So it's a great way into the telling of the Elvis stories. Oh my God, I mean, this poor, whoever's going to be playing that, this poor human, because talk about shoes, wow. And then when the first time I saw Austin's work as Elvis, we were doing a scene in Las Vegas, which is quite late in the piece. And so we didn't really know, I'd seen what he looked like. I thought, wow, that's a very good approximation. Then he came on stage, and then he started singing live, so not syncing. And all of us were just kind of like our eyebrows were blown off our faces. I mean, the man is astonishing, and he's also a total, like an absolute delight of a human being. So all of that is really particular, like really extraordinary. I think, I've been just, I'm in awe of his achievement. Big guy, bald guy, sitting outside in a sort of, singlet and shorts, eating his lunch. And I was like, g'day, mate. and kept walking. And as I was walking away, I thought, I believe that was Tom Hanks, because, you know, he was obviously bald, he had his bald wig on, he had his double chins on. I thought he was just like a part of Tom's security detail or something. So, I mean, number one, remarkable, like the distance between Tom and that character is really something. And he, you know, never a word of complaint, because this is a person who has to come to set 3.5 hours before everybody else and get all of that on. So you think all of the stories that you hear about, you know, Tom Hanks, nicest guy in Hollywood, it's kind of true, you know. First and foremost, working with Baz is always going to be fun because he's there on the day in Technicolor, always. He's never there, he never has an off day. He's always there, he's always got an idea. He's the most kind of rapacious director I have ever worked with in my life, in the sense that if the shot reads, and you just read it, they drive up to the front of Graceland in a pink Cadillac. And you get there on the day, you shoot the scene, like it takes ages, you know, they're setting up lights, it's all these gigantic things. You shoot the scene, we drive up the front of Graceland. Cut, he comes running over, brilliant, I loved it. I loved it so much that now I think we should get out of the car and walk to the steps and roll cameras, action, and you do it again. You get out of the car, walk up the steps. Cut, I love it. I love it so much. Let's walk up the steps and this time go to the door. And do it again, you go to the door. Cut, I love it. Go through the door. Go into the house, and it's like people are saying, well, the house isn't, we can't shoot inside. I know, just, so he's like, more. I just love it so much, give me more. So that's my kind of, that's pretty much Baz in a nutshell for me.
This is much more than just a biographical film about Elvis. I've always I've always perceived the movie to be really a film about America, told through the relationship of these two men. One man who is pure creativity and ambition, and another man who is all hustle and sell and ambition. And when you take those two kinds of American ambition and combine them, you get endless, wonderful, inspiring possibility. But there's another side to that coin, and there's a corruptible side to that coin. And I feel like that's such a great metaphor for the American experience. Baz doesn't just create movies, he creates entire worlds. And so the worlds that I've witnessed Baz create are as diverse as the Australian outback to Jazz Age New York, and now 1950s Memphis, 1970s Vegas. And so over the course of that whole arc with Baz, it's just so exciting to see Baz create and even embody himself. Just the every aspect of and live and breathe the world of the movie and the character. When Austin came in, and we went with Austin down to Nashville, and did some sessions in RCA Studio B, which was it's a big studio in which Elvis recorded hundreds of songs, and the music producer Dave Cobb, who works regularly out of that studio, pulled together just the most phenomenal session musicians working today. Some of whom had worked with musicians who had made many recordings with Elvis. And the way Austin was able to, in that space, with those musicians, bring some of this music to life, we knew we'd never need a vocal impersonator. And sometimes we are able to use Elvis's tracks, because Elvis's voice is irreplaceable and unmistakable. And in some of those later recordings, done with recording technology and techniques from the 60s and 70s, we have Elvis's voice. In the earlier stuff, we have Austin's voice, and sometimes we blend the two. But it's very exciting to be able to say that there are only two people singing in the movie, Elvis Presley and Austin Butler. It's really through CM's incredible craft ability as a designer and a visionary herself that they're able to really build this world and invite first the actors and everybody working on the film, invite them into the world, and then through making the film, the audience. We had some 95 speaking roles, over 100 sets. I mean, it's a lot of costumes, and it's a lot of sets. And CM is able to ensure that every detail of every costume illuminates that character, and that every aspect of every set tells you something else and draws you just that much deeper into the world of the movie.
In 2019, I went to meet with Baz about this movie in July, I think it was, and I'd read the script and we talked about his vision for the movie, and I was very excited by it. And what's great about Baz and CM is they always do an incredible amount of research before even they started talking to me. So I spent a day with him going through ideas and looking at images and reference material they put together and concept art. I think when I first read the script, I was excited about it because, one, I knew it was Baz that was going to create this vision, and also I just think to an audience it's a story that they're not familiar with, and the story of Elvis's life, and also just the great opportunities to create something that's visually amazing. One amazing thing about Baz is, I have to say, is that when I had that first discussion with him then, he had the film in his head. And as we're going along now, a year and a half later, we are making that movie that he told me about, which is, I think, great because I get time to think about it, and also, because he's a great collaborator, he brings people in that want to enhance his ideas, and in the sense of my job, it's bringing ideas of photography and how we shoot things, and to be able to, give him the vision that's in front of the camera. So, CM has these amazing sets and costumes, and then I bring something else to that. My initial conversations with Baz were about the story and how he wanted to represent the life of Elvis and the relationship between Elvis and the Colonel. And so we went through chronologically the history of their relationship, but also, the way that Baz wanted to create a world where people understood exactly what was going on for Elvis at that time. The musical numbers are always resonate with me. We have the music on set, so you can feel what's going on and what's relevant with the songs that Baz has chosen to do at that time. For instance, we were shooting last night. We were shooting Rustwood, and it becomes, a melee of screaming girls and people chasing after him. And he was playing this rock and roll music to get everybody inspired and energised. And he runs around with a microphone, and he'll be literally running into the shot before we shoot and getting everybody all excited. And this is like 10 o'clock at night. And to me, that's really emotional because I see how he's affecting the people in front of the camera too. And just getting everybody in the moment.
Because it involves a certain amount of showmanship. Parker's showmanship, Elvis's showmanship, and Baz as a director has those unique gifts as well. So, plus the musical element. This is a director who is deeply involved in the music recording industry and performing artists and ideas about how to recreate and rediscover the music of that period and to put it out there in a way as if people never heard it before. Tom was just finishing a performance of playing Falstaff in a production of Henry IV. Lent some real strong credibility to the idea of him playing a character that was duplicitous and lying and manipulating, but yet lovable at the same time, and sort of looking after his charge, Hal in the case of Falstaff, but in our case, Elvis, that somehow he would be able to manifest all those qualities that make him of a questionable character but lovable character, well-meaning in some cases but self-serving always, It's a really tough tightrope to walk, but he, anyway, very few people I think could do it as well as him. So I don't think it was an obvious choice, but I certainly feel like we got it right. And Baz and CM take great pride in making sure that every one of those background players could appear in a close-up shot and carry the day. And it's an interesting process. First of all, they communicate that to the background players as well. They make every one of them feel like their role is important, and that there's a backstory to who you are, why you're here, what attracts you to Elvis, what your feelings are about the people on your right and on your left, and it's an important part of their process, and it certainly reflects itself in the look of those audiences and the hair and the costumes. The performance that Austin delivered as Elvis on stage was, I think, beyond expectation, even though we all had high expectations. And you know, the other part of wading through this COVID period, this shutdown, this hiatus period, one of the other great concerns is that we knew that Austin was preparing himself in great detail and with great discipline, and you felt like this was an Olympian athlete ready for his the big event, and all of a sudden it's delayed, and you have this fear that all that energy, all that momentum is going to somehow be lost and dissipate. And so as we got back into it in September, he only got better.
Because she's in some ways remembered as a slightly tragic character, I really wanted to exploit some of the chutzpah of that woman, as well as the tragedy of her. So I did enough research that I felt I could honour her. So I looked through a lot of YouTube interviews, a lot of articles, I read books. I spoke to Baz, whose knowledge was fairly, and CM, whose knowledge is fairly encyclopedic. Gladys would have seen how dominant the Colonel was in Elvis's life. So she would have looked at that as a mother and gone, does this man have my son's, my only child's best interests at heart, or does he have his own best interests at heart? And I think she decided it was the latter. Baz mentioned that Vernon and Gladys were barely literate. So, and even, I've looked at copies of those contracts. They're pretty dense, and she wouldn't have known head nor tail what Elvis was signing himself up for. But Elvis was always therefore kind of beholden to the Colonel, grateful but also stuck. And I think Gladys saw that, and I think fairly quickly she went, I just think she didn't like him. She didn't like his manner. I think she found him crude. I think she smelled a rat. They adored each other, and I think he had to do a lot of reassuring. Sometimes I think he had to mother Gladys, and he was very good at talking her off the ledge. And he had to do that quite often. And at some point, to calm her down, he said, I will phone you, I will call you. When I'm on the road, I'll call you every night. And I think he was ribbed a bit about that. But, I'm sure he didn't do it all the time, but he did it a fair old amount. He did call her. He called his mother. I think she lived for those phone calls. And then they'd come back, and I think that was all kind of good, but then he'd be off again. And so, look, I just think she found solace in the bottle, and just became more and more unwell and isolated. Just from an acting point of view, he's incredibly generous. He's very giving. Like, he will listen to what you are offering, and he will take that and he will use it, and he gives a lot of eye contact, and he makes beautiful choices as an actor. He sounds exactly like Elvis. It's quite uncanny. And then you go and watch him do the musical numbers and singing and doing the choreography. You're going, well, tick, yes, perfect. And he never complains, turns up on time. I mean, he really is the package deal. And we all feel blessed to have him in this role. I love that theatricality that he brings, and he loves that in actors. He's very much an actor's director. And by that, I mean, never has there once been a moment on set, and he has so much going on. You know, sets and a million cameras and this and that and schedules and time, blah, 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 and it's all happening. But you've got a question about, would Gladys do this in this particular moment? And you really need that question answered before they say action. I can always, and any of us can, any of the actors can go up to Baz and go, I just have a question. Yes, what is it? And it's always yes and. Yes and. It's not, oh no, 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 no. It's never that. He will always take the time to make you feel comfortable about that moment and give you the green light to try it or give it a go or what have you. Because also he's quite brave in the fact that he will, even if, I don't know, maybe he hadn't thought of doing that moment like that, it's like, well, that's worth a few takes anyway, because who knows what little trail that could lead to. Or, you know, so he's very open to suggestion. Of course, he's got incredibly strong ideas about where he's going, what he wants, but it's not insecure in the fact that it's like, oh, no, it's just, yes, let's try it, let's do it. Yes, let's. And that's so freeing for an actor.
Well, it came from an idea about what would it be like to have Baz Luhrmann tell the Elvis story. Really was just an idea, and I thought it was a great idea. And because the story is a big American story, and Baz knows how to do that well, and it also was a musical story, and Baz really knows how to do that well. So I approached him, and he was interested, and we met. We chatted about it, and we chatted and chatted, and it was a 3-hour meeting, and he was mesmerizing, and he really understood the character of Elvis, and he really understood a good way to tell the story, which was a story more about America and myth and finding the man, and less about anything that you would ever know from the Halloween costume version of Elvis. I'm a huge Baz Luhrmann fan. I've seen all of his films. I love his filmmaking style. I love the grandeur of it. I love the beauty of Catherine Martin's production values and costume design, and the colors of his films are so vibrant and so amazing. And beyond that, the ability to use music and take it from a traditional way of listening to it to a modern way and blending that together is really a very unique style that he brings to most of his films. And he certainly brings that to Elvis. And when I thought about how to tackle a subject that's been tackled by so many people, or attempted to be explored by many people, because of the music and because of the canvas of the times, I thought, who could tell it better than a man who really knows how to blend music and epic and an epic quality to his work. And it just seemed like he was the guy. And it never seemed like anyone else could be the guy. It wasn't even a contest. I mean, it wasn't a fair fight. He just was the embodiment of Elvis, even in his screen test. I thought he was remarkable. And it's very exciting thing when you get to see somebody whose work you don't know, and you know that in another year or 2 or 3, depending on how long this is going to take, and it certainly took us a while, they're going to become a star from this performance and this role. And I could see that when I saw the screen test. Well, I think Austin Butler embodies Elvis. He's not doing an Elvis impersonation. He's not doing a caricature, as we've seen so many times. He's really embodying the humanity of the man. And that is the remarkable thing to watch. He also can sing. And so for the entire first half of the movie, it's Austin singing. The second half of the movie, there's a blend with Austin and Elvis. I always thought Tom Hanks should play the Colonel. I don't know why I thought that, other than the fact that I love Tom Hanks and he's such a great actor. I'd never seen him play the antagonist in a film before. And in my head, I thought he'd be amazing for this role. And when it came to pass that he wanted to do it, and obviously he wanted to work with Baz, and I believe that's probably his main motivation for wanting to do this. I think he gives such a remarkable performance. Obviously, he is in makeup that will surprise the audience because he looks a lot like the Colonel and a lot not like Tom Hanks. But beyond that, it's a performance that encapsulates the Colonel's power, charisma, cunning, smarts. It really, he has a full picture of what the Colonel was like. I mean, I believe his performance makes you understand why Elvis would be attracted to this man. He knows a lot. He's carrying a lot of secrets. A lot of things he does to Elvis are based on the secrets that he's carrying. So it becomes a tragic story, ultimately, for Elvis. But to see a character like that was real, a real live Carney guy, a real guy who found his geek in Elvis and knew that the audience would come along, Tom's performance is, it's just transcendent. That is all Baz and CM and the great prosthetic makeup artists that we worked with in Australia, and Tom's great patience in sitting in the makeup chair and going through that process, because it is startling. I remember showing some folks early on some photos of Tom when he first started shooting, and I was on the set and I took a few photos of him. And I brought them back and I showed them to people. And I said, "This is Tom Hanks." And people said, "What? That can't be Tom Hanks." I said, it is Tom Hanks. So the work that they've done and the subtleties, too. I mean, it's not just this exaggerated prosthetic look like we see a lot in films. It's a very specific prosthetic look that makes him look a lot like the man he's playing, but also fits for Tom. Catherine Martin is the most talented costume and production designer I certainly have ever worked with. Her exacting work, the specificity of every single thing she does, the beauty of their partnership, Baz and CM, and how they work together, and how she runs her department and the people who work with her understand the level of detail and the level of excellence that has to go into the project. And many of those folks have worked with the team for a long time in Australia. And watching CM and Baz, it's a remarkable team. always Baz in the lead as the director, but CM brings an extraordinary sense of precision and beauty to her work. While I knew there was a bigger story to Elvis than what I had ever seen played on screen or television, I had no idea of how deep it really went, and how important not only a musical figure he was, but also a figure in terms of the attempt to bridge divides. The story of Elvis and the story of the times really come together. So if you're looking at race in America in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, that story can play itself against the backdrop of Elvis's life. If you're looking for the story of politics in America, that story can also play itself against the story of Elvis's life. And if you look at music, that definitely does. So I think it's a remarkable story on a lot of levels.
I like the kids. I don't have a problem with what's happening. It looks good. But is it like this? Is it? Yeah, of course. How many kisses? It's how.
Hey, Mark.
Grab it, Mark.
Never looked for trouble, but I never ran. I don't take no orders. I'm no kind of man. I'm only made out flesh, blood, and bone. But if you're gonna start a rumble, don't you try it out, because
I tell you what we'll do. When you CB there, then revo yourself to try and CB down there.
Yeah, Evan!
Snowfall. Creatures of the carnival. I am one of them. I came into this world an orphan in Huntington, West Virginia, but I ran away to join the circus. You are either circus or you are not.
baby, and I want you to know. Come on back, let's play a little house, and we can do what we did before. Now, baby, come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, come. Come back, baby, I wanna play hard with you. Hit it!
Two, one, and action!
It feels so good. I came here before I went to Australia to start filming, and coming here now, it feels like coming home. It's such a relaxing, warm feeling, and you feel his spirit here. So it all comes full circle in such a beautiful way. I didn't know what to expect when I was sitting down in the theater, so I know that I was hit by seeing Elvis's story in context within the span of a film. That's a really hard thing to do. Baz has done such a beautiful job with that. Being able to tell the truthful story within the context of a film, that's such a spectacle.
Baz created this to be seen on the big screen. The sound, the visuals. I mean, it's really extraordinary. So, and Elvis was one, he was larger than life, but then he was so human. And so I think you get both of those aspects in the film. And so you get the larger than life is the stuff that you want to see on a big screen. And then the humanity is that side that we haven't gotten to see a lot of. And so I'm really grateful that we got to explore that in this.
When we first heard that we were going to end up here, there was like, well, now that's perfect. And I thought for a moment, is that legal? I mean, I view Graceland as being, some combination of the White House, the holy city of Bethlehem, and Mount Vernon, where George Washington was born. It is every now and again something happens in a movie career or on a movie where you're just in a place where you can't quite fathom that this is where it happened, and we've recreated it somewhere else, but now we're come back to actually inhabit the three-dimensional space. And I just feel like the luckiest guy in the world, man. Actually, it was shaping the narrative for a very, very mysterious guy. He is literally the two faces of Janus. He was without a doubt, a cheap carny who would try to take everybody for a quarter, as in 25 cents, or $250,000. Whatever he could get out of somebody, including some members of the Presley estate. But outside of that, as Priscilla and Jerry Schilling themselves have told me, he was one of the most delightful men they've ever met. He brightened up a room. He always took care of it. He's very respectful to everybody. And particularly in those early years, when he realized that this entertainer, this artist, that was standing behind him on stage, making this audience respond in a way that he had never seen an audience respond. I think he was without a doubt a genius for the way he took Elvis and made him exclusive, one of a kind, and with staying power that lasted much longer than some of the contemporaries in the 1950s. And I think that was the current.
I worked out today that it's actually 5 years since I first came here to Memphis to start researching on this film. And Angie, who works in archives here, she set me up a little office in the archive area. And we started there. I started researching actually Sam Bromell, who was researching and writing with me. We lived it. I know Memphis so well. Since I've come back, a few of the night spots have closed, and there are others I'm sure have popped up. But it's special, and to think that the journey of this film that we made in Australia has brought everyone back together again, and the whole family is here. Here in this one moment, that just doesn't happen. Like there's some other force greater than just a movie going on, I feel. I always said if I can't find someone to play Elvis, I won't make the movie, and I kind of secretly think, I might not have to do this. I'm off the hook, And but the journey with Austin was really like, I really feel like he found me. He found the role. It's now well documented that he makes this tape. He shares this journey that Elvis had, losing his mother early. He makes the tape. I see the tape. It's well documented. It's true that Denzel Washington rings me, who I don't know, and says, you're about to meet the hardest working actor I've ever met. It's true that when Austin comes in, he's already way down the road. And interestingly enough, I realized at that moment I'm going to have to get a voice impersonator to do the young Elvis, because we can't use that footage. Can't use that song, music, because it's recorded in the wrong way for a film. And so I said to Austin, do you think you could sing it? And the screen test I just put out where people are going, like, is that really him singing? That's him singing. Somebody just told me that when she first saw the movie, she did not realize. She thought it was Elvis. She didn't realize. How does it get better than that? It does not get better than that.
It feels so powerful. It feels so monumental, evolutionary. Baz has an amazing way of allowing everyone to feel like they're a part of this world that is so glamorous and sexy and fun. And most importantly, just powerful. So it's very inspiring. I'm happy to be here. It's important to highlight where this all started from, with the movement and the birth of rock and roll, with not only Little Richard, but Sister Rosetta Tharpe, B.B. King. It's important to pay tribute and pay homage to the creators.
It's unreal. I've never been here before, and I feel the overwhelming amount of love coming from Memphis. And I'm just excited to kind of hang out and, share the movie with Memphis. It's cool. BB was just like such a trailblazer, when you think about what he's gone through and the influences that he pulled from. I think it was such a big inspiration for who Elvis was and the sound he was seeking after. And I think also showing the brotherhood and the camaraderie between these two icons in different ways. Rock and roll, rhythm and blues, they kind of connect in some way. So you have to include BB to tell Elvis' stories.
I mean, it feels like we're on a holy site being here at Graceland itself. I've actually never been to Graceland, but I grew up super Pentecostal and never heard any music except for Elvis sneak through, because they always had gospel records. So for me, it's like hearing the music and being in the place where your whole life was formed musically. So a lot of weight being here right now, for sure, no doubt about it. I mean, Memphis created so much of the fabric of American music. I mean, it all kind of came together right here in this boiling point. So to see it, come back to the place where it all started is pretty magical,
It's funny, when I got here, I kind of felt like I'd already been here, even though I hadn't. So it feels really grounding. It feels like, it might sound corny, but we're exactly where we're supposed to be. They can expect to feel very satisfied. This is one of the best films I've seen in a very, very long time, and I think it's brilliant.
This is massive. I think it's massive to come here where the story started, where the story lived, where the story played out, I think it's important for the region, especially with all of this energy coming to the area, bringing Hollywood, if you will, Hollywood to the hills, as I would say, man. So no, I think it's awesome. I think it's amazing that there's an interest to come to the cradle of this story, to come to where this story was born. I think it's important, and it's amazing. Oh my God, man! Brilliance is contagious, man. And what you realize too, man. Especially with Baz, man. What I love about working with Baz is that he really embodied what Elvis was about. This whole TCB concept, take care of business. That's exactly what Baz did, man. But with every step, no cutting corners. Everything is done to epic proportions. I'm talking every shot was synced. Every scene was shot to epic proportion. Every note of this music was done to epic proportion, man. So there are no corners ever cut, man. So, the work with Baz was amazing because that's exactly what he did. It's TCB, take care of business. As far as Austin goes, man, it was crazy to get to know Austin and to really watch him, how seriously he took the role, how committed he was to the role, how purposeful he was. And then at the same time, how he got stuck in it because of COVID. He kind of got locked into this Elvis character for a long time, bro. But it was good because he got a chance to let it soak in, if you will. Elvis really got to soak into his spirit, man. So to watch him be transcendent in this role is amazing. I'm excited about what it's going to do for his career, too.
It's a great feeling. We're all together. We've all enjoyed this amazing film together. We're really happy about the film. And we're looking forward, actually, to sharing it now with America. Well, first of all, I know, Baz is an amazing director and also a writer. I've always liked his film. They're a little bit, they're Baz Luhrmann films. I mean, he has his own take on things, on life in his films. And I was a little nervous at first because he kind of does his own thing, but the product has been truly worth the weight in gold. It's an amazing film.
Well, I think for his legacy, it's as important as the well-known 68 comeback special. It was 68 years ago next month that Elvis started his career. And I think Baz Luhrmann and Tom and us, they have done the next comeback for his legacy. So it's really exciting. It's nice to be a part of it and have somebody play your life. It's kind of cool.
Well, I'm nervous but excited about what the hometown crowd are going to think about the film, obviously. So fingers crossed that they enjoy it. And I'm a little nervous about going back to Graceland tonight for a barbecue because I'll be coming face to face with something that we created in Australia. And we spent so much time here before the pandemic, and we built Graceland, and it was wrapped under plastic while we were shut down and then emerged. And so it'll be interesting to see how I feel about what we did and whether I'm, you know, just as confident and cocky as I am right now after I see it again. You know, we had 2 watershed moments, I think, in the costume design. Baz is always very clear about how he wants to see things. He's a very visual director, and it's always about character and being story-led. So in terms of, say, recreating historical costumes, it became really apparent early on that we couldn't just imitate, we had to interpret, and there had to be a nexus between Elvis and Austin's performance, similarly with Olivia and all the other characters in the movie. And then we realised too that we had to possibly recombine elements from Elvis's past in order to connect a contemporary audience to his looks. Like in the pink suit, all elements from Elvis's actual life, but all recombined. Baz wanted to have this visceral sexiness that a contemporary audience would be able to connect to. So yeah, they were the 2 things that kind of stand out for me in terms of the design process.
I met this young woman before I began this, and I will bring her on, but she's part of the family, but she also just won the Cam d'Or at Cannes. Can you believe that? Riley here. In every way, Baz, all the cast, Austin, I can't even, like, it's hard for me to even get the words out to Austin. But it just the devotion and the everything, just from the speaking to obviously the performances, the dances, the movements, but just the silly mannerisms, and not in a way that's a caricature or some satire or some, silliness. Like, he genuinely grabbed his spirit like I've never seen before. And having, not been, I was quite young, but I still remember, my father's energy and his vibe, and Austin absolutely you know, and what's the word? He nailed it.
We've taken this film to Cannes. It was amazing. But we've gone to London and blown out there, amazing, and Australia, amazing. But this is not that. This is not that. It's true what Joel said. 5 years ago, I had to ask someone, when was the first time I came to Memphis? When was the first time I went to Tupelo? It was 5 years ago. And Angie set me up in the archives, and the whole town though, like whether myself and my research team were at Graceland, or whether we were looking for someone like wonderful Sam Bell, who took a long time to find and sadly passed last year, or I know in this room there are many people who knew Elvis or the family or the story, because it's the home of this story. And we will do other things.
Yes, of course, we want to say something. Obviously, thank you so much for joining us for this wonderful, wonderful occasion. My family, I'm not going to just speak for myself, but we're here to support this movie and to back all the folks here today that were in the film, and of course, Baz, you're genius. I mean, what you've done, and you know the story that I was very reluctant at first, not knowing how this film was going to turn out, because you know Baz can get a little, you know, he's got his own take.
It's great to be in Cannes, but it's almost mythical the way that coming back to Graceland has brought the family, has brought the cast, has brought everyone here. It's almost not imaginable. And the feeling today, just being with everyone and talking about the journey of the film, I mean, can you imagine everything here that we had to build in Australia, like every square inch? I mean, Austin was reminding me that when he went back to the house, that he could look at the stairs and go, you know, I broke up with my wife on these stairs, you know? And I went, Austin, he's acting, okay, right? But look, it's not like anything else. It's not like a normal premiere or a normal getting together like this. It's that special. Again, in the early part of Elvis's life, influences, you know, but also his friends. And, you know, we have Little Richard in the film, sung beautifully, but played amazingly by Alton Mason, who is also here.
Well, I'd like to think I'm responsible for 2 movies about Memphis. Not only do I play the manager that helped make possible in his diabolical genius way, many a platinum record that has been delivered to Graceland. I also made the movie about the messenger delivery service that can deliver those platinum records overnight, on time, 365 days a year by way of FedEx. I just want to say that as an actor, I found myself shooting in castles in which kings once lived in. I shot in palaces that have been turned into museums that were the homes of kings. I've shot in museums in which kings and queens have lived in. But notice all of those kings, queens have an S on the end of them, meaning that there were more than one. At Graceland, we are visiting the home of the king.
Has his own take on things, and I was nervous, and actually the first viewing that Jerry and I got, we were by ourselves in the theater. We did not speak at all. And we weren't going to go to Cannes because we hadn't seen the film yet, and my concern was, oh my gosh, I'm going to go. I know Baz, I mean, not personally, but I do know he's on his own, and and he listens to no one, and he does everything. He's not only the producer, but the writer. He is the heart and soul of this film. So as we're sitting in the audience, not the audience, in the theater, Jerry and I not talking to each other, and I leaned over to Jerry and I said, well, it looks like we're going to Cannes.
I didn't know though, okay? The first time I saw the movie, I actually didn't catch it. I thought he was using tracks. So I just want to say that because that was quite shocking for me, as well as everything else that he did. That was incredible. But okay, I'll be quiet now. I love the movie, and I hope you do as well. I want to say that I feel so honored to be part of this. I really wasn't expecting this. I didn't know what to expect. I saw it twice. The first time I saw it, I was just nervous. I was gripping the chair, like, oh God, what's gonna happen? What is this? You know, how's the actor gonna be? How's, you know, is it gonna be too crazy? Is it gonna be? And it's been, one in my life. It's been one disappointment after the other in terms of people portraying my father in various films or attempts to. Bless their hearts. I'm sure that they meant well. I'm sure they meant well. But let me just tell you something. It's at this point, I tell you this with all my heart, and that's the reason I'm here. It's been done right.
Playing the role of Sister Ruby Littlethorpe, and here she is. See, Yor and I are dressing in exactly the right tones. Let's see if everyone else holds the flag up. You know, to have someone play Priscilla, to have begun, in her journey when she meets Elvis very young, but also to evolve into this mature, iconic character in her own right. You know, we have found in Olivia de Jonge. Please come to the stage, Olivia. Wow. You both know how to walk down a catwalk. It's amazing. I made a rule, which I thought I'd be able to get out of making the movie, and the rule was, I'm not making this movie. I very rarely make movies. I'm not making it unless I can find Elvis. Someone can play Elvis. I thought, that's great. I'll never find someone to play Elvis.
And Baz, obviously, the whole cast has been incredible. And Baz, I have no words for you. You took me. I saw it with you. I was terrified, and then after he came in, I watched it alone by myself in a movie theater. Baz left me, and he came back to get me when it was over. And he said, "What do you think?" And I was like, I'm a wreck, and then I just started crying my eyes out to Baz and ended up in his arms, and I was just a mess. So that was the first time, and the second time was, one of the most incredible, and then I'll shut up, things that I didn't know was that Austin's actually singing all of the young Elvis.
Now, I don't know, I bet a lot of you have heard the stories about how it came about. It wasn't a normal casting process. It's almost like Austin found it, but it was almost like he was born to play it. And you know what? I even had to put a video out yesterday to show him in one of his early screen tests singing, because no one believes that he sings all of the young Elvis in the movie. And you know what? That's just the tip of the iceberg. I won't say anything more because a lot of you are about to see his performance, but please welcome Austin Butler.
I don't know how to follow that besides the fact that it just means the world to me getting to be here with all of you. It feels weird even saying making this film, but this life that we got to live for, it's been a part of my life now for 3 years, and I just can't say enough how much this means to me. Also, my sister's in the audience tonight. She's gonna get to see the film for the first time. This is for Mama. I love you, Ash.
Stage with the new generation of directors. And then someone who very early on I met and have forever been thankful that they've been there through the whole journey, and what a journey it's been. But it's Lisa. It's really personal. light shining when we thought we could not make the film, when we thought it would come to an end. When Tom first got COVID, and I rang him and he said, oh, maybe we wait until February. He said, we've got to show that we can do it. It all started here, and it's amazing that we are all back here. So I thank everyone in this room for helping us. Alton is a snappier dresser, as Little Richard was in real life, don't you think? Now, B.B. King, by the way, B.B. King. I was at Beale Street last night. I came back here after 5 years. The first place we went down to Beale Street. You can still go down that street. You can still go to a place. And there was a young guy, long hair, 25, bass player, older man, still blowing it away. Amazing. Just across from B.B. King's joint. To get an actor to play that character and to wear shorts like that, Kelvin Harris Jr., ladies and gentlemen.
We're here this evening, and of course my daughter being here, and I know she loved it. And of course the cast was unreal. Austin, you know how we feel. Truly, Elvis morphed into you, I have to say. You had his guidance. You had his guidance. Tom, you were amazing as Colonel. You were amazing. You got it down, and you know, we had a talk about him, a long lunch, and you did it. You really did it. You gave it so much thought, and that means a whole lot to us. And of course, beautiful Olivia. Thank you so much. You touched my heart in the film. You truly did. And of course, all of you did a great part in this. So thank you so much. Lisa, you want to say something? Sure.
Speaking of that, one thing that I said when I began is that this isn't like a Cannes or a premiere. It's not like that. And I think what makes the difference is that we usually go and we invite people into our theatre, but you see, we've been invited into a home, and it's a home, it's the Presley home, and here tonight are the Presleys. And can I invite to the stage, first of all, Elvis's dear friend, Jerry Schilling.
I just have to say one thing. In the audience tonight, I want to say hi to Dixie Law. Dixie, you also mentioned that film. This was Elvis's first girlfriend, and I love her to death. I love her to death. Santa, good to see you. Sorry.
Well, I think maybe we just slink off this way and let all you fine folks see the movie. Shall we do that? Thank you so very much. I hope you enjoyed your friend, Jerry Schilling. Just a quick side note, because it's exciting to bring all kinds of actors together. But one of the thrills I have is to sometimes take an actor at the beginning of his journey, hasn't had much of a go, not much of a chance, and give them a few lines and see how they go. And, you know, this one did pretty well. I mean, he's at first Tom Hanks, ladies and gentlemen. An amazing moment also, but to have the person who played Priscilla, but also to have Priscilla here. So, I mean, maybe Tom, maybe you want to say just a little something being here at Graceland.
Well, hey, thank you for coming to our home, you know, because for people who've been to Graceland for 40 years or less, and people who are at Graceland for the first time, thank you for coming for the first time to Graceland tonight. This is really our home. It started with Elvis's home. It still is Lisa Marie's home. And everything that you see and everything that we do is based upon the family. When Baz wanted to do this, you know, Baz Luhrmann wanted to do this movie 5 years ago, and he came to Graceland because that's really the genesis of everything Elvis. And 5 years in COVID, and it's been a really interesting experience. But when you see this movie, you'll see why we entered we brought Baz Luhrmann into the Graceland and Elvis family. So I know you don't want to hear from me. So let's get to the greatest storyteller, one of the greatest storytellers I've ever met. I'd like to introduce Baz Luhrmann.
It's exciting to be here today with my family in this historic Chinese theater. I remember coming here years ago going, my gosh, to have your handprint on here or your feet print and signed must be quite ideal, and it is. Certainly, had Elvis lived, he would have been given this honor and proudly become a part of this great Hollywood tradition and Hollywood history. It's a privilege to do this on behalf of our family and Elvis's great legacy in entertainment and even as a person.
This is just a huge honor for us. Speak for me and my family and my children. Biggest honor. We're so grateful. I'll be brief. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting us. And it's a very special moment for all of us. We feel incredibly honored. So thank you.
In living and researching in Graceland 5 years ago, the one thing I learned many things about Elvis. You learned that when he was a child, he read comic books and he dreamed of being the superhero in those comic books because he truly was a dreamer. And one of his biggest dreams was to come to Hollywood and to be an actor and to be acknowledged in Hollywood. And that's why we're here today, to acknowledge and honor his legacy. Just standing here in this historic theater, even for the first time I came to Los Angeles, it never loses its magic or its power.
Before I had the honor to portray Elvis in this film, I was a fan, of course, but I also felt a very soulful connection to him, one that I couldn't quite explain. And thanks to Baz, who gave me the gift of this role, my understanding of Elvis as a artist, as a global pop culture icon, as a historic figure, and most importantly, as a human being, has grown beyond what I could have ever imagined. And with it, my respect for his legacy, the legacy he left behind, and his loved ones who have carried it forward. I think it's safe to say that Elvis would be so proud to see the loves of his life, his family, here today to honor him along with all of you.
You know, I really didn't set out to do a bio picture about Elvis. But if you really want to explore America in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, you know, he's at the cross culture. He's right in the middle of it. You know, he's the rebel Elvis in the 50s. He's the kind of movie star Elvis in the 60s. And he's the lost Elvis caught in a trap in Vegas in the 70s. So it's almost like a kind of wonderfully punk but tragic American opera. So it was a perfect canvas to explore so many things. Yeah, it's a really unusual process for casting. I've never had it before because he was an outsider. But he has this spiritual thing where he lost his mother at the same age as Elvis. And one night he actually has a nightmare about it, and he goes down and plays the piano and he sings to his mother Unchained Melody, and that videotape got in my hands. And then I got a call from Denzel Washington who said, look, I've been on stage with this young actor, you're not going to believe how great he is. And pretty much from when he came in, he was already starting to be Elvis, and I never saw him not be Elvis day or night for 2 years. It's funny because what I saw happening just in Japan, and maybe it'll happen here in Korea, I think young people understand that Elvis was the first ever idol. They also understand that the image an idol gives out and what it's like behind the scenes and the sacrifices and the complexity. Personal relationships for an idol are very complicated. Elvis was not allowed to show that he was having a relationship or fell in love. And that's true of a lot of idols. And so the only way they can really express themselves is through music. So the music in Elvis is not just Elvis music. I've tried to open the door by using contemporary artists as well. Doja Cat, Eminem's done a song, you know, all sorts of artists. I'm even working right now with a very famous K-pop star and a brilliant producer, just doing a tribute to Elvis. All sorts of artists are even doing other musical tributes to Elvis that are not in the movie. I think what we see here in terms of music is that we forget just how much Elvis has been an influence on music and culture now since he burst on the scene in the 50s. And it's starting to happen everywhere. We see people dressing up to go to the movie. We see people singing along with the movie. I'm not exaggerating because the movie's now being #1 in America, that people have seen the movie 6 and 7 times. This is really happening. So one hopes that people get together in groups and in Korea and get into the spirit of it and sing along. We all toiled and struggled to not show for a lot of young people. When I spoke to Rosé from Blackpink, you know, she only really knew Elvis through, you know, at first through Lilo and Stitch, but she's a very intelligent young performer. And young people either know the guy in the white suit, older people know the rebel. But I think what we see in this, and I hear it from you, is that Austin's allowed us to see the person. And so often with idols, people see the stage performer, but they don't see the person inside. So I'm very honored that you have had that experience. Yeah, I think so. I think we know it's called show business. And Colonel Tom Parker represented the business. And he, played by Tom Hanks, and he was a genius. He invented all sorts of incredible things like the first satellite concert, the first greatest hits album. He was the one that invented merchandising. But then making money out of Elvis overtook the artist Elvis. When the business and the artist are in a good balance, where the artist has some control and investment in their art, and there's a true partnership, that's a good thing. But when management or making the money overtakes them, then the artist becomes, as Elvis says, caught in a trap and they can't get out. There lies suspicious minds. Well, I always think when it comes to art, you never play favorites, because it's like, is a song like Jailhouse Rock better than Suspicious Minds? I mean, they're completely different works. I like You know, it's like with film, you know. I love Batman, great. But also Elvis is different, you know. There are just good and bad films. But I think of course, there are great K artists happening right now. But some of the earlier ones too are tremendous influences. I mean, I think going back to say Rain, very early on, an actor, performer. Clearly G-Dragon is a total icon and a fashion icon. And also I think he was one of the first K artists to really bring that mix between hip hop and rock and roll, which has now become really fresh again. You know, Blackpink, what Teddy Park does with Blackpink and the team themselves, they're up there with the Ronettes or some of the great women's groups of the 60s, in my opinion. Do you know, obviously BTS, you know, what's so great about BTS is that they're the full package, and, you know, they have a great balance as a group. You know, they have real agency in what they do. You've got to admire what Mr. Bang does in making sure that the artists have ownership. To me, they are the Korean Beatles in a sense, in that the Beatles, they can mature and grow. So there are many more K artists I could talk about. CL, for example, broke a lot of ground, I think, for female rappers. She did brilliantly in that regard. I could go on, you know. But what's really great about it is that there's always been an ability in Korean culture to take the influences, obviously having American soldiers here in the 50s brought Elvis here. He was the original idol. But what's great is Korean culture takes that and makes it its own. And then it makes something new. And that's what happened with rock and roll. Rock and roll is African rhythms and Irish tune. And they come together and something new is born. So yeah, I would never say one is better than the other. There's just exceptional work and unique work and creativity that is owned, and work that isn't, you know. J Park, for example, is doing something different and interesting too. There's just a long, long list of really, you know, I think Stray Kids are bringing great new energy to the scene. Well, there are more than I mentioned, you know, when I start, that's the problem. When you start making a favorite list, you know they're not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's this here. There's just artists who truly are expressing themselves. And also, that's a lifelong journey. And I think we've got to be a little careful and understand that artists can fail and also make mistakes. You know, they're not gods. And with Elvis, we held him up to be a god and it destroyed him. He fell very harsh. And I think that the fans and management and the government and all of us have to understand that it's an enormous pressure to be creating uplifting fantasy and beauty and art for us. And that can be very destructive if we're not kind enough to allow them to grow and make mistakes sometimes. You know, I so rarely make movies, and I have lots of ideas of what I'm going to do, and I work on them all the time. But then I take a moment, which I will at the end of this, probably in August and September, and I just disappear from the public thing, and I regain my own spirit. You know, I have the same problem as some performers. I have to refuel myself. And then I'll look around and I'll go, what can I make that would be really useful in the world? So there are all sorts of possibilities, but I certainly dream of making something that is a coalition between where I'm coming from and the K culture as well. You know, there's such a vitality here. Also, it's in relationship to Australia and America. We're like a nice triangle, you know. But I'm not saying what I'm doing because I really don't know. And if I say it, I have to do it. Okay. Yes, you know, actually, Joe, I have a great interest in Korean culture, both in music and movies. I have a lot of friends, and I'm thinking of some projects that might actually be Korean-based. So I was really coming to catch up with my Korean creative friends. But when I got here, the enthusiasm from the Warner Brothers team here for the movie, the excitement I could see for the movie, I couldn't help but say I should stay longer. And I've got to be honest with you, I've been working with really exciting K-pop icons. I'm making some music. I'm doing that right now. And doing further work like that. But I think when you get here in Korea, there's just a really great energy. So it's hard to get away from it. Yeah, it's a good question, Joe. I didn't really want to do a biopic about Elvis. I just thought if you want to understand America in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, he's a great canvas to explore big ideas on. I mean, what's so interesting about Elvis? He was the first ever idol. There was no pop idol that was globally famous before Elvis Presley. And because I'm working with Korean pop idols, that's something they really understand. And something else you really understand is when at the height of your fame, you suddenly have to go off to the army, as Elvis did. And one of the big dramatic questions in the movie is, when he goes off to the army, will he be successful again when he comes back? And that's a big dramatic idea. Now, the other big theme in the movie is the relationship between Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks, and Elvis. And that's the relationship between management and the artist. And I think that's something a lot of people in the Korean entertainment industry understand, also the fans. They really understand this relationship between the cell and the soul of an artist. And the last thing I think that you really get to get out of this movie, and it's true to the fans, you really understand young people. They really understand the price of fame. That what it looks like on the outside is not necessarily what it is on the inside. Well, I think if fireworks is a metaphor for an explosion of energy and light, it's bright, it's dazzling, but then it's gone. It falls from the sky. And I think that there's probably a truth in that, in stardom. That there's a great excitement in the movie, particularly if you see it in one of these great cinemas that you've got here in Korea. Amazing sound, spectacle, color, all of that. But it burns brightly, but there is a tragic side to it when it comes to the price of fame. I mean, in the end, fireworks illuminate the sky, but then they're gone. I hadn't heard of Austin Butler before, and very few people had. And he did this incredible tape. He lost his mother at the same age that Elvis lost his mother. And one night he had a nightmare about it, and he sent a tape of him singing to his mother, Unchained Melody. And then I got a call from Denzel Washington, who said, look, when you see this young actor, you're going to see an actor who works like no other. And for 2 years, Austin worked on being Elvis nonstop, day and night. I never saw him out of character. I never knew what his real voice sounded like. And even now he's having trouble getting his real voice back. So I think a lot of talk, of course, it's too early to talk about Oscars, but people keep talking about him being the #1 contender for Oscar. And I think that that's legitimate because it's an extraordinary performance, no doubt about that. Yeah, they don't have control over the estate. They didn't really see the script. They didn't make any influence on it. I spoke to them early on and I got some information, but the pandemic came between us. And I don't think I've ever screened my movie or a movie and ever been more nervous about how someone might react than when Priscilla saw the movie. Because critics and experts can say what they want, but Priscilla was married to Elvis. Lisa Marie's Elvis's daughter, Riley, the granddaughter. And when Priscilla saw the movie, I was so nervous. And when she saw it, she was very cynical. She said, how can this young guy do the performance? So that when she wrote me the note and said, no one's come even close. And if my husband was here, he would say, hot damn, you are me. That was maybe the best moment in the whole experience. Well, that's a good question, Joe, because unlike my other shows, I can create everything. But in this show, I had to create reality as well. I was handed slices of absolute reality that I had to reproduce. If you go on the internet, you'll see sections of the Elvis footage and Austin compared, and they're identical. But then I also had to imagine and create parts of Elvis's life we don't know about. So I think it's different in that regard. Plus, the concert sequences had to be very, very accurate. And Austin was so great that when he was doing the concert sequences, honestly, my crew had trouble working because they thought they were at the real concert. I mean, he did so much more music than we have in the film. And in fact, I'm going to announce here in Korea that every week we keep Elvis in the cinema, I'm going to release an unseen piece of footage from the movie. It's a good question because I've been interested in Korean culture. Actually, from a funny, many years ago, but then when I was doing Gatsby, which is 2016, 2PM, the band, did an album called, I think, F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I looked at it and I went, wow, there's so much care and passion taken in creating Korean music. So I got very interested in that, and I always liked the Korean movies. But I think what it is philosophically, I think Korea's always had to think outside of the borders. That's one thing. They've had to think globally because of the population. But also I think because of the fact that GIs were stationed here. Elvis has a direct connection to K-pop. The fact that GIs brought rock and roll into Korea early on and it mixed with local talent. You see Korean popular culture being able to bridge both Western influence but making it their own. And so they've been very successful at, like America, taking many influences but making their own culture. And I think it's an exciting period for Korean culture. And I don't think it's a fad. I think it'll transform and transmute, but I don't think it's a fad. It's an exciting epoch for Korean culture. I mean, I never want to say exactly what I'm doing because once I do, I have to do it. But I wouldn't think it's certainly possible. Yeah, I like to say to my fans, Elvis's fans, but much more importantly to young fans of popular music, of popular culture. The film's not just about Elvis. The film's about you. Because it's about becoming famous overnight. It's about commercial selling versus artistic selling. And also Austin Butler, remember he plays the character, was the first idol ever. There was no one that was, 19 being a truck driver. And overnight, he's the most famous man in the world. And he's so wealthy. And the music in it, I've tried to do something with the music in it whereby, even though it's classic Elvis, Jailhouse Rock, I've also got lots of guest artists like Doja Cat and Eminem and all sorts of artists doing weaves. And in fact, I think you might be interested to know there's maybe a famous K-pop icon about to do something. I'm not going to tell you right now. But all sorts of artists are weaving and opening doors into the music. But mostly, the thing I'd like to say to the young Korean fans is, I think you'll learn a lot about life and love and the creative journey and the perils of fame.
いろいろ興奮する材料が多すぎて、やっぱり音楽ライブシーンっていうのはもちろんですし、監督ならではの世界観の作り方であったり衣装もそうですし、本当に目を離せない連続の作品でした。本当に、新しい音楽映画ができたなっていうふうに思いましたし、今回、こういう場所に立たせてもらえることがすごく嬉しいなって思ってます。絶対楽しめると思いますし、やっぱりエルヴィス・プレスリー自体がすごく偉大な方ですけど、実際私たちと同世代の方が詳しく知らなかったりする人も多いと思うんですけど、そういう方でも絶対に楽しめるし、やっぱり音楽ってこんなに素晴らしいんだなっていうことを再認識できると思います。
Well, actually, Japan is often the last stop on the world tour.
大体ワールドツアーの最終地が日本
And we end up having quite the good time.
で一番楽しむんです。
But I was just saying that it's really important to me because Elvis dreamed of performing in Japan. And with the film going #1 just now in the US, you know what? I come here when I'm not working. Quietly, secretly. So I really enjoy the world of Tokyo. So I hope for Elvis that he gets to perform here, and I hope young people go out and see him because I think they'll see that he was a rebel. he was also like incredible good spirit. And in this horrible world, he'll take them on a journey where they'll see that actually, watch out for the business. You know, there's business and there's art, and you've got to, as B.B. King says, he says, if you don't do the business will do you, so be careful. Yeah. I think for young people, it's a cautionary tale about fame. You know, like now on TikTok, you can be famous very quickly, so be careful. There's no question the level of amazement of what he's achieved from, I mean, Priscilla Presley had nothing to do with the film. When she saw him, she said, if my husband was here, he would say, hot damn, Austin, you are me. Like she said, I've never seen it. Even I was fear. I knew he could do it, but there was some fear. Could he handle the pressure? But now I think the world, so many people feel like they feel Elvis has been reborn in Austin. You know, I want to say to all the fans and all the non-fans, either you know maybe Elvis in Lilo and Stitch, like I was talking to someone from Blackpink the other day, she said, oh, I only know him in Lilo and Stitch. Or you're a great fan. What I want to say to you is this thing that Elvis is so much more than what you think he is. He's not just the man in the white suit. He's not just the rock and roll guy. He's a very spiritual, very pure human being. In these difficult times, I think he will give you hope, joy, fun, cheers, and most importantly, he'll give you love. So come out and enjoy it. Surrender to the film like a rock show, like you're going to a rock show. Because people need to be brought together, and that's what Elvis was about, bringing people together.
So Elvis sadly never got to be here in Japan. And so I just feel so honored that we get to be here. This is also my first time in Japan. Yeah. And everybody's been so lovely and so warm and welcoming. So I just said thank you to all the Japanese fans, and I hope you really enjoy the film. It makes it so special, you know, to get to be a part of a dream of his and get to bring his legacy here. It's such an honor. So many things. The food, you know. My first stop was. I landed and we went and got sushi. And the greatest sushi I've ever had in my life. So yeah, I just want to get to explore the city as much as I can.